All right, I think we're ready to get started. I'll introduce myself. My name is Brenda Erskine, and I'm the Director of Communications and Stakeholder Relations at the municipality. And I'm pleased to welcome all of you here to our second Waterways Focus Here For You session. We've got quite a bit of information to share with you tonight, and we've got a number of presenters lined up to do that, and then we'll follow the presentations with a Q&A. Just a couple of notes first. A reminder that we're all here to share information and to listen, and we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. So welcome questions from everyone at the end, but if you want to go into your issue more deeply, as always, we have people on the other side of the curtains who have lots of expertise and who are more than willing to share lots of time with you. And we also have lots of people with the municipal lanyards on. You can identify them, and the people who've been up here speaking. So we've got lots of time after the formal presentations to answer your more detailed questions. I would also remind everyone that this is live streamed. We don't have the ability to bleep out any profanities, so if you can keep those to a minimum or not at all, it would be much appreciated. Just a reminder that we have an obligation to portray our community and waterways specifically as the mature adults that we are. I know that you'll accommodate that. I think that's about it. The agenda this evening, we're going to cover off the survey results from the Waterway Survey, and some of you may already be familiar with those results, but we'll go through them in a little more detail. We're going to talk about the flood hazard area and the explanation of that, planning and development considerations, the legal waiver for flood hazard development, some geotechnical explanations, and then some specific instructions for those of you who are interested in moving out of the flood area zone. So with that, I'll introduce Dana Woodworth. He's the lead of our recovery task force, and he's going to start out the agenda and deliver some information to you.
Thanks, Brenda. Good evening. My name is Dana Woodworth, and as Brenda indicated, I'm the task force recovery leader for your community, for the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. So you'll see a number of presenters here in this particular session. There's only about 20 slides, and there's about 4 or 5 different presenters, and that's very deliberate, so we can have the expertise at the mic speaking to the slide that's in front of you. What I want to start with and give you an understanding is really of what we heard. So you're aware that we surveyed your community from September 8th to September 30th, and we had a number of survey results that came back. In fact, overall 146 surveys were completed. So I thank each and every one who took the time to provide us not only their recommendations, but their frank advice and their perspective. It's very valued. The survey is not meant to be a precise statistical tool. We recognize that. But we also believe, and it's really the mantra and at the core of how the Wood Buffalo Recovery Committee operates and how we as a task force support the committee, we need to engage with you tonight and continue to do so with all the communities that are affected by the wildfire. We need to understand your perspective and really explore what is best for you as a resident in this community. So it's a whole of community effort, really, that will recover your community, not just a handful of bureaucrats, frankly, deciding in a vacuum. So there could be duplication. There could be some errors within the survey. We recognize that. We also believe it has provided us with sufficient opportunity to come back and provide you with what we actually heard. So I'll let you look at that slide. And it's an interesting slide. We framed the survey. You have to start somewhere. So we had initial conversations with some community members. We had some experience from other disasters. And we framed the survey that lets you examine 3 options. So a status quo, which would very much, your community would come back and look very much like it did prior to the disaster. The concept of an internal swap where you might, if you choose to, reallocate particular plots of land for different purposes, and a bit of a rationalization process. We talked about an external swap where you would leave the flood hazard area and perhaps waterways as a whole and go somewhere else. You can see the survey results for those three options, and we deliberately asked for input. What else might we have missed? What would you consider? And of note was a buyout, and I'll just put that as a buyout, but certainly a large percentage, up to 20% of the survey, indicated a potential desire to leave the flood hazard area. So just want to feed that back, provide you that survey results, and let you know that's interesting. We start in one point and it moves over time, and we take the feedback. We'll have an opportunity as we go through this presentation to recognize that other as buyout, that option, and we actually want to very deliberately better understand what that means to the people and the residents of Waterways, and that's part of tonight's intent. And we'll have an opportunity to do that after we finish the presentation and questions. We'll actually provide a room and a place to meet with those who either already expressed the other or want to understand better what it might mean for them. We haven't taken a decision. There are no policy decisions taken. That would be premature. We simply want to explore what the other means and have a better understanding. And at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over, the mic over to Aaron O'Neill, who will really paint a picture and provide some detail on the flood hazard area.
Thank you, Dana. As Dana mentioned, my name is Aaron O'Neill, and I'm the operations manager with the Wildfire Recovery Task Force. So we have presented this map to the Waterways residents before, but some of you may have not seen it before. The map is comprised, everything that is in the hatched area is considered what we refer to as the flood hazard area. Now, this flood hazard area is designated by the province of Alberta, which compromises the floodway and the flood fringe. Now, the floodway is considered areas that when it floods would have velocities of more than 1 meter per second, and the flood fringe area is considered areas that have water that is flowing less than a velocity of 1 meter per second. Both of these areas combined do make up the flood hazard area, which we have looked at over time to see who is interested in moving out of that area or what that could look like. The majority of properties within Waterways are located in that flood hazard area. We do have a blown up version of the map here so you can get a better look, find your lot. It also gives details of the numbers within the flood hazard area and with outside of it. We do have copies of the map available at our Here For You table, and also in the other room where we're going to talk about those moving out of that hazard area, that we can identify which lot you're in to confirm where you are. At this point, I would like to pass it over to Dan Fitzgerald and Chris Booth from our Planning and Development Department, and they are going to go through the planning and development considerations for you. Thank you.
So thank you, Erin, for that. As she mentioned, my name is Dan Fitzgerald, and I am one of the planners with our Community Development Planning Department. We're just going to first touch off on the wildfire recovery overlay. So there was a session previously on this, so we're not going to spend much time on it. Just a quick overview, then I'm going to talk about the flood bylaw 16021, which was the repeal of the flood bylaw standards for the municipality. And then I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to go through the development standards for you, okay? So just to start it off, bylaw 16020, which is the flood recovery bylaw, was a wildfire recovery overlay introduced as part 11 of the land use bylaw. It applies to the wildfire damaged areas of Waterways, Abazan, Beacon Hill, Stone Creek, and Wood Buffalo. The overlay repealed bylaw 0736, and it also provided direction for rebuilding in the residential neighborhoods. It provided certainty to those owners that will rebuild the same footprint as existed. So there was concern that there would be potential for properties nowadays, if they were built back, they could be potentially legal nonconforming. This overlay bylaw provided both planning and those residents the certainty that if they were building the same footprint as prior to, we would respect that footprint as it was approved in the original day. It also expanded the range of rebuilding options for owners that proposed different footprints of their properties. So all the land uses within the overlay, it should be noted, are technically discretionary uses. Things to also take into consideration. The development officers may choose to impose site-specific conditions as it deems advisable to address technical, planning, or land use issues. As well, something to note, planning and development shall not refuse to issue a development permit for single-family dwellings that meet setback requirements on lots which are greater than 7.6 meters. So there was a certain concern that there was a potential for lots, specifically, maybe not necessarily in this area, but certainly in other areas of the municipality that were concerned that they may not be able to redevelop due to lot size. So this is meant to address that everyone has the ability to redevelop on those lots now. So getting into the second part of the presentation would be Bylaw 16021, which is the Flood Hazard Zone Bylaw. This was a motion that was introduced by council, and the motion was originally to repeal bylaw number 13032. So that was a bylaw that was implemented following the flooding in 2013 of the Hanging Stone River. What it did is chiefly it imposed development restrictions on properties within the flood fringe as well as the floodway, specifically stated that no development could occur for habitable floor space below the 250-meter elevation. So that is that identified 1 in 100-year flood elevation. What this bylaw did was repeal that original bylaw, and it also removed the flood-proofing requirements that were in Section 60 of the Land Use Bylaw. So that there was certain concerns that were raised internally with relation to a specific section, which was Section 60.3, which specifically prohibited any development below 248. When we looked at lots specifically in the waterways area, we did identify potentially 47 lots that may not be able to redevelop given that specific provision. So the idea basically was to remove any type of potential hindrance to those waterways residents, as well as residents in other areas of Fort McMurray that are living within the flood fringe area, and give them that certainty that they can still move forward with redevelopment. Finally, one thing to note, the recommendation to council also stated that rebuilding the floodway or flood fringe area is a risk, and that owners will be required to acknowledge that risk by signing a save harmless agreement and register it on the land title. And David LaFleur will also speak to this a little bit later. So thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Chris now to discuss the development process.
Thank you very much, Dan. As Dan stated, my name is Chris Booth. I'm also a planner in the Community Development Planning Branch. What I'll be running through with you very quickly here is generally the process that you'll have to go through for obtaining a development permit. What we're endeavoring to do is to make this as easy and as painless as possible. And what Dan has provided for you is some information on the overlay, which does just that. However, what we're striving to do internally is to also provide everyone who is interested in rebuilding with very concrete information about not only your zoning, but about what you can expect to go through during the application process. So what I'll outline very quickly here, first and foremost, you must obtain a development permit. This development permit will allow us in the planning department an opportunity to assess simple things, height, setbacks, issues like those. After you obtain the development permit is when you can obtain your building permit. The building permit gives our safety codes officers, building inspectors, an opportunity to then look at the structural aspects of the building and make sure that everything is being followed from the safety codes perspective. When you get your building permit, you can also apply for any of the necessary trade permits that you require, electrical, plumbing. I believe we have some members from our safety codes division here to speak to anyone interested tonight. But certainly anyone interested in talking about development permits can speak to myself, Dan Fitzgerald, Isela Contreras, Amina. We have a number of staff here that is very interested in helping anyone out tonight. I'm going to move over quickly to describe to you the land use bylaw. And what this is, in a nutshell, is telling you what your zoning is. So what you can see here is an example that we've pulled from just a standard district or zone. And what this is outlining for you are your front yard setbacks, your rear yard setbacks, height, simple stuff like that. Lot coverage. What we'll try to do is help people make some sense of what all of this is supposed to mean for each individual property. Because anyone who is interested in doing a rebuild that's slightly different from what they may have had before is going to have to pay very close attention to what is required by the land use bylaw in these districts. And what we have following this for you is basically a map showing you what the different zones are within waterways. And again, we have blown up versions of these out back for anyone who wants to take a very close look to find out what their property is designated or zoned. And you'll notice on here there's a lot of different acronyms: R1M, R1S, RMH. Basically, all these acronyms are just telling you what kind of building form we are encouraging, or rather requiring, in each of these districts. So a lot of waterways is comprised of R1M, which is basically just a mixed-use zone. And very simply, that just means this is where you can put houses alongside mobile homes. It's a very unique district. You can't do that anywhere else. You only find that here. And again, RMH, C1. So again, if anyone has any lots in waterways who are interested in rebuilding, we urge you to come to our table in the back. We have copies of these districts that you can walk away with tonight, and we are available to talk to you about any questions you may have about rebuilding in those areas. When you are ready to submit your application, we've tried to put together a very straightforward checklist. Now, when you look at it initially, it seems very daunting. There's a lot of stuff identified in that checklist. I'll be totally honest. What we're here for you is to describe to you what each of these is trying to do and why it's important. If we do not receive this information, sometimes that's where applications get hung up. So the more information that we have in this checklist, the faster a development permit can be processed. So you'll see here, site plan. This is basically a bird's eye view of your property, showing us your setbacks, front, side, rear, location of buildings on that lot, and building plans. We need to see floor plans. We want to see the layout of the house. Abandoned well site information is an interesting one. And this wasn't something that we typically asked for in the past, but we have started to. It's very important, but it's also very simple to obtain. All you have to do is go to the province of Alberta online, and you can just pull it. It's a very simple map. It can be attached to the application. Very straightforward. We can walk you through all of that, and it's contained in the checklist. So again, if anyone has any questions about this particular process, please feel free to speak to us tonight, this evening, or come into the office. We're located at 301 Powder Drive, which is up in Timberley. We're available from 8:30 till 4:30, Monday through Friday. And again, you'll have planners available and safety codes. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to David Lafleur, who will speak a little bit more about geotechnical, I believe. No?
Nothing to do. You don't want me talking about geotechnical, believe me. Nor do you want me building your bridge. Okay. So my name's Dave Lafleur. I'm the Director of Legal and Legislative Services for the municipality. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to explain about this. You've probably all heard of this by now, the requirement that there's going to be if you build in the flood zone area, the flood hazard zone. What I'm about to say has no application to you at all if you're in waterways but above the flood hazard zone, okay? But if you are in the flood hazard zone, and if you want to rebuild, so I'll go back, I'll pick it up where the last speaker left off. He was talking about development permits. So anyone who's had any background or had to deal with this before will know that when you get a development permit, it isn't just the permit says, okay, you get to do this. There's always conditions attached to a development permit. In very large, complex commercial developments, those conditions can sometimes run to many pages. When we're talking about smaller, simpler residential developments, the conditions are typically much shorter. They're straightforward. But in this case, for those people who are going to rebuild in the flood hazard zone, what we're proposing to do is to say, on top of what other conditions might be there, there's going to be a condition that you're going to be required to sign one or more legal documents that essentially, I'm not going to get into great detail unless someone wants to talk to me privately later, but essentially the purpose of what we're asking you to sign is to acknowledge that you realize that you're building in a zone that's prone to flooding and that there may be a risk of you being flooded at some point in the future. The important thing to remember about this is that we're going to ask you to sign documents that are drafted from a legal point of view so that they can be registered on your title. Now, you may wonder, well, why would you want to do that as a municipality? Why do you care? It's important you understand why. There's a case that was decided some years ago by the Supreme Court of Canada, one of the most important cases for all municipalities, really, that basically makes it clear that if a municipality is aware of a particular unique hazard or dangerous situation in the context of permitting and zoning, we have a duty to warn, okay? And we have a duty to warn not just the person who is the current owner or current applicant for a building permit. We have a duty to warn anyone who we reasonably foresee might be harmed by that condition or situation. And so it doesn't take a genius to realize that the person who is most likely to be harmed by that is someone who doesn't know that this is a flood hazard zone, and that would be a subsequent purchaser. Could be next month, next year, it could be in 10, it could be in 20 years from now. At some point, every property sells, and we have a legal duty as a municipality to ensure that any subsequent purchaser is warned that you're coming in, you're proposing to purchase in a flood hazard zone. All right, so we have a duty to warn. Now, how do we do that? How do we warn people? The most obvious and practical way is to be sure that there is something on the title to the property that clearly states that this is the nature of this property. It is a flood hazard zone, and it could be a risk. Okay. So I just want to make clear that we're not doing this because we're trying to make things difficult for anyone. We're doing it because we have a legal duty laid down in the case of Kamloops versus Nielsen, Supreme Court of Canada, saying we do have a duty to warn. This is the way we're choosing to do this. So I can get into more detail, but I just wanted everyone to know that the purpose of you being asked to sign one or more legal documents of that nature that is clearly intended to be caveated or filed on your land title is simply that. We want to be sure that everyone who might later come into this community, think about buying in waterways, they can do it. Like the city council has determined that they're not going to prevent people from building in flood hazard areas. That was the bylaw that Dan talked to you about a few minutes ago. But by the same token, everyone is taken to understand that it's a risk, and we want to be sure that anyone in future years that might consider relocating, acquiring a property in waterways is well aware of the risk. So it's basically as simple as that. I wish I actually had copies of the actual documents that I've just alluded to. We haven't quite finalized on that yet. We expect that to happen in the next couple of days. But when we do, of course, they'll be made available to everyone. So I don't know how we're handling this. I think we're getting all of our presentation out, and then if there's questions, so I'll hold on. And Dana, I think you're going to wrap it up.
Thanks, David. So just a couple slides for me, and we will wrap it up and turn it back to Brenda for questions. I want to talk very briefly about geotechnical and some of the requirements that exist within Section 62 of the Land Use Bylaw. So in terms of development, setbacks from slopes require geotechnical reports, and they have to be submitted at the time of development when you put your application in. On September 27th of this year, the following motion was approved by Council, that Council direct administration to complete the overall geotechnical assessment for the waterways area. So focus on two parts of that sentence, overall and waterways area. What it means is administration was requested to do a broader, so not a individual property lot level assessment, but a area assessment within waterways for known areas of potential risk for slopes and setback. So a request for proposal has closed, and we are reviewing the submissions to select the contractor to do the work as directed by Mayor and Council. What the intent of the motion is to provide information not only for land use planners and development in general, but an area-wide assessment will help inform individual residents who have properties in that particular area. It may not remove in its entirety a need for your own personal level assessment, but it will provide additional information that simply does not exist at this point in time. So it will be of value to not only the municipality and land use planners, I believe it will be of value to individual property owners. I started the presentation talking about what we heard and feeding back some of the information, and I'm going to close it with the same conversation. We know from the survey results that there is interest within the community to consider moving out of the flood hazard area. So based on that, we want to further explore that tonight, and we'll have a process to do that. I would say in the very first instance, now, if you wanted to leave waterways, the flood hazard area, it's never wrong to talk to your insurer. You might find provisions, you may not, but you might find provisions in some type of opportunity to do that. So I would always point you back in the first instance to your insurance policy and be fully aware of what's in there. Municipal land acquisition policy states that land is only purchased at fair market value, so be aware of that. That's a policy statement that is extant. It exists right now in this community. So appraisals which indicate the land value will be required for us to even consider intelligent policy thinking around this. So you should expect that, and we'll have those conversations for those who are interested tonight. And despite the municipality proceeding with, gathering this information and being better informed by what you're thinking, it's a consideration only. It's not a choice or decision that has been taken. And I'll turn the floor back to Brenda.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks to all of the presenters. Quite a few topics covered off there. So as you heard, there are representatives from planning and development here who are available to talk with you in more detail about your specific lot and your needs and the permitting process. And they'll be behind on the other side of the curtain. And as Dana mentioned a couple of times, those who want more information about buyout are encouraged to go to a separate room for those discussions. But prior to that, we'll take any general questions. And as always, we'll invite you up to the mic where Jerry and Sarah are there so that everyone can hear and so that also those who are watching us online can hear the questions. And I'll do my best to direct the questions to the right experts, but if I don't pick the right expert right away, feel free to stand up and volunteer. So I don't see anybody at the mic right now, but we do have a couple of questions that have come in online. And the first one is, why was the berm built in waterways if it is still considered a flood zone? I'm not really sure what the berm being referred to is, but Aaron, thank you.
So the berm that's being referred to in the question is Saline Creek Parkway. As part of the overall flood protection program, the berm was built. It also does provide a secondary access out of waterways. So that was built to the 248.5 flood level at the time of looking at our flood protection, and it was meant to act as a flood protection in that area.
I have someone coming up from the audience. If you could introduce yourself, just your first name as well. Thanks.
Yeah, my name is Mike Marchand. My question is, there was a buyout done in High River when they got flooded out, and I was wondering why it wasn't one of the three choices. It ended up being the second highest choice on the list, yet it wasn't one of the three choices that were presented, and I was wondering why that was.
Hi, Mike. Dana, I appreciate the question. So, perfection not achieved, and we accept that. Our initial analysis of actually what the community wanted to be considering were the three choices that were put forward.
That's from the committee, the recovery committee.
No, really from the task force level in terms of initial policy considerations, not even the committee.
Okay, my second question is, and you may be able to answer this one too, is why I know that Ptarmigan Park is considered part of waterways and waterways, but actually they're separate and they have separate issues. Really, they should be considered separately. They have different issues, even though they're both in the floodplain. I'm wondering why they aren't being looked at separately, I guess would be my question.
And so I'll give part of the answer, and perhaps Aaron wants to elaborate. So to be clear, I've actually heard, I've heard your perspective, and I've heard the exact opposite from certain residents within waterways. So it's been clear to me that some residents very much believe that Ptarmigan Court is key, central, and core to waterways. So I just want to share that and feed that back to you, Mike. But certainly Aaron may be able to elaborate on Ptarmigan Court.
Thank you, Dana. Ptarmigan Park has been part of the waterways community. It has been included in the past area redevelopment plans, the city center bylaw, all of those as part of the waterways community. So we've been consistent with keeping Ptarmigan Park as part of the waterways community.
I agree with you that it's part of the waterways community, but what I'm saying is that there are separate issues in both communities that are not the same. I can give you examples. There was talk of lot size. That's an example that the lot sizes are not the same in Ptarmigan Park as they are in waterways. That's an example. Ptarmigan Park also has water on both sides of it, which you don't have in waterways. You do have water on the one side, and so that's some of the differences, but there are other differences too. So that's why I'm just saying I thought maybe they should be looked at separately rather than as. I understand looking at them as one because I agree they are all part of waterways, but they have separate issues.
And I would offer that in any of our communities, Abasand, there is separate issues, so in the north end as opposed to the south end. So while we look at, yes, there might be specific considerations or land use considerations in Ptarmigan Park as opposed to the remainder of waterways, it is one entire community. We do look at those specific considerations at the development stage and through this whole process, but I would say that each community does have its unique sections of those areas.
And one quick last question. You said that people that were interested in the buyout are going to a separate room. Is that correct? Afterwards? Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go to a couple of online questions from the same person, and they're both related to the legal waiver. So I'll do them both at once, Dave, and you can answer them both. The first one is, if my home is above 250 meters, do I need to sign a waiver? And why wasn't the legal waiver mentioned in the survey? That actually may be more of a question for Dana, but I'll let you take the first one.
Well, you're giving me the easiest one, Brenda. If your home is above or on the level, as you see on the map, where the flood hazard zone is, so if you're not in the flood hazard zone, you're not required to sign any legal document, waiver or otherwise.
So the simple answer is sequencing, so time. The survey was completed in advance of the bylaw being repealed by mayor and council for the floodproofing requirement. And as part of that informed the conversation after the survey had been released and the decision was taken to repeal that floodproofing bylaw, it was realized and believed and appropriately, in my opinion, noted that the waiver should also be included. So it came after the consideration.
All right, and next up at the microphone, please.
Hi. My name is Margot Furman, and I have a question with regards to the geotechnical. By my count, between High Cliff, Lower Cliff, and McPhee, there's approximately 30-plus properties that have varying degrees of geotechnical, questions for rebuilds. I see that the work has gone to proposal, so what are the timeframes around completion for that work?
Thank you. So the area does include all of those areas for the request for proposal. We did get the submissions back last week. We are reviewing them, and then it would award that work, and it could take up to 6 weeks to have that work done in that area to do that overall assessment so that you could proceed to planning and development. That does not preclude if you wanted to move faster than that doing your own geotechnical report, but we do understand the cost implications with that, and we are working to get that contract out so that we can move forward with that geotechnical as soon as possible.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to that, so don't move. I know for myself, I completed geotech because I'm one of the newer builders 14 years ago. So we did the full report with core samples, everything. That was $10,000 plus. I know that there can be soil reports, or you can also have reports done that don't include the core sampling, which makes it significantly less. So how will the planning department determine what, level of testing is required for individual properties?
I'm going to defer to my friends in planning and development. Dan, Chris, do you want to assist us in that? We'll use the overall assessment to determine if you even need to do a geotechnical. You may not based on our overall assessment, but they can speak more widely to what they look for when they do those permits.
Excellent.
Thanks for the question. So with relation to geotechnical work studies, more on the lines of the engineering department that's going to require that, as well as the building codes department. So it's not something that planning specifically looks at when we approve properties. It's actually our counterparts in engineering as well as safety codes. However, with that said, I see an individual who knows a lot of information on this subject at the back there. And I would potentially defer to Greg if he would come up here, and then he could potentially provide you with some information. It may be possible that the engineer that is designing your home or your architect might be able to use some of that information from that. I think it was the 2003 survey. I believe I spoke.
No, my survey was completed in 2000 or 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it might have been one of the neighboring properties that I spoke to with relation to that area, but they may be able to use aspects of that report in terms of the core sampling. However, with that said, and Greg will describe what is required in terms of actually placing a foundation on a property for a rebuild.
Thanks, Dan. It might be a little more than I'd be willing to describe based on the generalities of the question and the location. But typically, what determines the level of investigation required by the geotechnical person will be the geotechnical person themselves, because it's dependent on the slope, the type of building you're proposing, the location of the building, what the ground conditions are under that particular lot and location. So while the general information is used for geotechnical firms to overall kind of get a feel for a particular area, when they do an overall geotechnical study, there'll be limitations on that study based on the information gathered, which is usually a lot broader than would be required for an individual property. So once you have decided where you're going to build it, we really, as has been said before, we can't use an overall broad geotechnical study to come up with specific requirements for your individual property, but the person you hire will do an assessment and may use that information. In fact, they will. They'll generally use all the information they can gather generally on the area, so they're not reproducing data that's already been gathered, but it'll be specific to your particular property.
So I guess my question is, before going ahead with engineered and architectural drawings, which we know can be quite costly, the municipality is doing its broad strokes geotech, but is there an opportunity as a homeowner prior to the development review process to sit down with someone and sort of vet it and say, okay, is it worthwhile to go through with that piece of work and that investment of time and money?
Well, certainly. I mean, we're willing to meet with anybody, anytime on any development and look at all of the information that they can present and any of the information that is available whatsoever, and provide you our best answers on your individual particular property. And we can certainly, try and contribute to that. Ultimately, though, it'd be, you're looking at hiring a firm to do some level of site investigation on your property. So you could hire someone and they would do, as much investigation as is required in order for you to make that determination of what the potential costs are going to be to put a building on that spot. And then they would also provide you the information on what further level they may need to go in order to actually erect that structure, which may be on a little bit deeper level than initially. I mean, somebody could go in initially and do some test holes and say, wow, like this is really going to be a problem, and so this is what it'll be. And you'll get varying answers from varying firms, frankly. So we're certainly willing to help you with that and provide as much input as we can to your situation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. All right, before we go to the next person to the microphone, I'll read an online question from Sonia. Other areas could put in a permit application that came with some restrictions that needed to be repealed before work began. Why couldn't Waterways do the same? Anybody? Aaron? Okay. Other areas could put in a permit application that came with some restrictions that needed to be repealed before work began. Why couldn't Waterways do the same?
So I believe the question relates to one, we had a restriction in Abasand, Beacon Hill, and Waterways about development until the recommendations of the Chief Medical Officer of Health were in place. So that bylaw restricting people from developing in Abasand, Beacon Hill, and Waterways has been repealed by Council in September. There was also the overlay bylaw, which was applied to Abasand, Beacon Hill, Stone Creek, Wood Buffalo, and it was applied to the area of Waterways that was outside the flood hazard zone at the end of September as well. The area within the flood hazard zone, once that bylaw for floodproofing was repealed in early October, that also included the area of the flood hazard zone within the overlay. So we are progressing down the same path. We did mean to make sure that we had those flood hazard considerations included before we move forward, but Waterways is on the same schedule as all other communities at this point.
Thanks, Erin. And next up.
Hi, Yvette. I'm on the floodplain. Just have a quick question. If you guys looked in the longer run about once signing the waiver that I'm stating that I am on the flood zone, did you guys look into insurance companies that they're willing to still insure us, or if we're going to be paying massive high insurances? Even just overall, putting that on there, it's basically making me look like I won't be able to ever sell my property again, because somebody that if I would potentially want to sell in 3 years, somebody would be, well, I wouldn't buy on a flood zone. So I'm basically, it's like stating that I can't move on, right? I'll be stuck with that place for the rest of my life, right? So just kind of want to know, even for insurance wise and stuff like that, because with a mobile and anything, I could always just take that mobile and move it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But would I still be bought out on my property as well, if that potentially ever wanted to happen?
Okay, is that when you can take David, or is there somebody from IBC
I'm
here?
all over the place.
So I can take a stab at part of it, and yes, if the gentleman from IBC is here, he may want to supplement what I'm about to say. So we did take into consideration the likely insurance implications, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but basically waiver or no waiver, I mean, if you're going to be in a known flood hazard zone, you're going to have difficulty getting any insurance coverage anyway, regardless of anything the municipality does, at least at any affordable cost. Is that a fair statement? Yeah, okay. So we didn't, looking at what we have to look at from a municipality, we realized that was a situation. We can't improve it for you or make it worse, so that didn't become a great factor in our considerations. But you had another part of your question, though, okay?
I just wanted to say, you guys are working on the flood mitigation.
Right.
You guys are, after all this major funding with the flood walls and all this, wouldn't that, almost, be better for our community anyways?
Okay. So you're asking very important questions. So you've just added another one, but I'd like to deal with your first one first. So yes, we do recognize that if there is something on a person's title that is intended to warn a future purchaser, that may have an impact on the saleability of your property. That's possible, but I would volunteer this. If you have a problem selling a property in a flood zone, it's because it's in a flood zone. It's not because there's a caveat on your title, right? It's because it's in a flood zone. I mean, that's a reality. Not many people are interested in voluntarily going into a flood zone. The only purpose of caveating something in your title is just to be sure that people are aware of it. In most cases, common sense tells you people who are considering potentially buying into waterways because they like the community, there's lots of nice things about it, are probably going to be aware anyway, whether there's something on your title or not. We're just saying we have a duty to warn. I think I explained that before. That comes from a Supreme Court of Canada case. We can't just ignore what the Supreme Court tells us. So that's the consideration there. Now, you just added another element to it. Sorry,
with the flood mitigation, with the the funding, to get that, is that in the works right now? Is it? Okay, now I'm not going to speak from a technical point of view. I'm not a technical person or an engineer, but I do know this, that once the flood mitigation, whatever it may turn out to be, I'm talking about physical flood mitigation. I'm not talking about other things that can be done in terms of, getting insurance for everybody. That's a different matter. But if there's a physical flood mitigation, whether it's a wall or a berm or something that's intended to protect against a 1 in 100-year flood, once that is put in place, we would revisit the things that are on titles. I'm not promising you they would come off, because let's face it, there could be a 1 in 200-year flood that would overwhelm whatever we would build. Okay, I'm not saying it's likely, but basically it's going to happen once every 200 years, right? So we would be prepared to, and we will relook at the need for things on title after that 1 in 100-year mitigation is built. Again, I can't promise you things will come off title that go on, but we'll certainly look at the need for it to continue after that. Okay? And I just have one more thing about the permits. I went up, I got my application. It is very vague. It's you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do any of this. But I feel I went up to that place and seen if I could get some help. And so a guy reached over the counter and tried to help me know, there's people out there, there's elders in the community that actually physically, some of them can't read. People really need help actually reading this stuff. They don't come in with instructions, not really good ones. And I'm a single mom. I don't have any kind of thing when I'm reading this stuff, right? So I just, if you guys could actually have somebody sit down and actually draw your pictures and all that kind of stuff, because I have no clue half the time if I'm doing it right or anything, or I just should hire somebody to do it for me.
I think that's a very good point that you've raised, and certainly I know from a number of years of experience here, I myself will sit down with people, because you're right, sometimes the counter, it's a physical barrier, and what we want to often do is break down those barriers. So if someone comes in and I encounter them, for example, I will very often go to one of the side tables, we'll talk about it. We might spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes talking about it. And we'll look at examples, we'll go and make sure that someone understands every point that either the land use bylaw is trying to make or that the application checklist is trying to make, because I certainly agree with you. A lot of it can be daunting, a lot of it can be confusing. When I first joined the profession, yes, a lot of it was confusing. We even had to learn. So I can appreciate exactly how someone might feel reading all of that material. So certainly we commit as planners to being able to help people understand that information, and we'll very often jump the counter and come around and try to help people. I certainly appreciate that.
Thanks. Good questions. Oh, yes. And you also asked about insurance, so we'll cover that too.
Yeah, and I understand there's a question about insurance and about the insurability of these properties based on documentation that's on title. So insurance is about risk. And if you live in an area that's prone to flooding, that's a significantly different risk than an area that's not. So whether there's something on title or not does not affect the insurability of something because it's in a known floodplain. I saw a slide up a little bit earlier that showed something from the government of Alberta about known flood-prone areas. So these would be known to the insurers as well. Flood is something that's not generally covered under insurance. There is some limited availability within the marketplace within flooding, but typically people in a flood zone would not have that available, or if they do, it would be significantly expensive and exorbitantly in relation to that. So I hope that answers your question about whether there's something specifically on the title or not would not deter or detriment you from the availability of insurance. It's based on the risk of where that particular property is located and the construction and a number of other factors. Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, and before I go to the next question, I did want to clarify something. With the last questioner asked about the flood mitigation and the demountable wall. So I think most of you who've been following this are aware that Council did approve some funding for pre-design work on the demountable flood wall, but it's still very much under study and under consideration, and I'm not sure if they have the right solution yet. So more information on that will be coming in the near future, and we'll certainly make sure that all the Waterways residents are aware of what's happening and invited to hear more. Sorry, one more question from online. Will rezoning on Railway and Beaulieu happen to align with the area redevelopment plan?
Hi, thank you for the question. As I've mentioned many times, those rezonings are going to take place with the new land use bylaw rewrite, which we are approximately 80% complete pre-fire. And rather than come to the public with it at this particular point in time, I really don't want to exhaust the public with consultation. I'd rather get through some of this rebuild activity and then bring the land use bylaw forward. So yes, that rezoning will happen, but it's part of a larger project.
Thanks, Jamie. And next question.
Hi, I'm asking this question on behalf of a resident down there that has a standing home. They're having trouble getting in and out with security, and they want to know if this could be easier, because right now they're getting text. They have to text their address, they have to validate approval to get their friends and family in, and they want to know if this could be made easier to them, and they also want to know when the security checks are going to be taken down at the gate.
Aaron.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. So we do have those sign in and sign out procedures at the gate. We do regular audit checks on those to see how that process is working, but we will take that information back to our security group and make sure we are making sure that there's not texts and additional materials that these individuals have to do to go through. We are working with the Chief Medical Officer of Health on the Phase 2 re-entry for the standing homes. We do believe, we have hired a contractor through the municipality to finalize the debris and ash cleanup in all of the areas, and we do anticipate that the areas of Abassan, Beacon Hill, and Waterways will be done by the end of October, which will facilitate the green home reentry. Now, I say the end of October. That does not mean that green home reentry may not happen before the end of October. It will depend on the level of ash and debris that has been cleaned up in those areas. And we are directing our contractors to work in the areas closest to those standing homes so that we can proceed with that green home reentry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Another online question. Will the survey be redone? Dana?
So I would say I don't know. Part of what we're going to hear in this particular session and next door, if we don't have sufficient information, if we don't feel we're well informed to make policy advice, then we will have to come back. It might not be a survey per se. At some point, you have to wonder if you can't get the information from a survey, what is the best tool? So I wouldn't say it won't, but it will depend really on the level of information and our comfort with what we're hearing in this particular session. And it's a tool, one of many. In my particular belief, it's a good tool for a broad level, but I think your community is relatively tight. It's relatively cohesive, and personally, I'm of the opinion that a gathering and a face-to-face engagement is a far more powerful way of actually understanding the issues. So I would share that with you.
Thanks, Dana. And one more question at the mic.
Hello, I'm Tom Holland. A couple quick comments there. First, there, Dana. Regards to will another survey be completed? I'm along the lines that the first survey wasn't done properly. A mail-out should have been done to all of the residents. There's a lot of residents that have not returned. They've got nothing to return to. You have the addresses. It's a forwarded address. The mail-out should have been done to everybody instead of just the ones that are in town. Second comment, the flood signing waiver has, the flooding that has experienced down in Calgary, further south, all of that was waived throughout Alberta at that time. I'm just kind of wondering why Fort McMurray seems to be that they require the signing. But that's a decision on the municipality's part, so that really wasn't a question. The third one would be actually a question back to planning and development. Your comment about Railway Avenue and Beaulieu Avenue being redeveloped, or not redeveloped, but rezoned. You're saying you're 80% complete. You don't want to overwhelm the residents, but I'm thinking, as a resident, these choices should be made now. I don't want to plop my house down this month or next year and then find out a year later that the rezoning is going to be complete and changes are going to be made after I've decided to build a house. If I can get a little more follow-up to that first question that was applied, why are we not rezoning, or why have we not made a bigger progress towards waterways at this point?
Well, thank you for the question. And as I mentioned, we're out in the public quite a bit, and we're here 4 or 5 days a week talking about rebuilding and recovery. I guess to be quite honest, we'd have to find some time to do engagement for a land use bylaw. And that's not just as simple as 1 or 2 sessions for 1 week. This is a massive undertaking that requires a lot of public engagement, and it's bigger exercises with more hands-on activity. So what we are looking at is we don't want to exhaust the public with consultation processes. We've done that in the past where we've just been out there too much, And we want to give some time for this to see fruition and recovery and rebuild to happen. And then we're going to come out to the public to talk about what the bylaw should look like, specifically in areas so waterways would have their own engagement session, for example.
Thank you very much for your answer, but I will leave on one last comment as to the decision should be made now, not next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before the gentleman leaves, I hope you're not going to leave the room. I'd just like to supplement what was said. My understanding is your concern is that you might be making plans and obtain the development approval to do something, and then rezoning happens, and now something different. You can't do that. I've got like 30 years experience in municipal law. Most times that I've seen when we're not just talking about a little change to this or that part of a bylaw, when a whole new land use bylaw comes in to replace one that was there before, in most instances there'll be a clause in there that provides for a transition period that basically says if you got a development permit under the old bylaw, you get to do that, right? Whatever you got a permit for. I haven't spoken with Jamie about this yet, but I'm just saying, so he's maybe surprised at what I'm saying, but I'm just saying that my experience in 30 years in municipal law, that's typically what's done. So I would expect that we would do something along those lines so that if you have plans, I encourage you to pursue those plans and get your development permit. It really won't make any difference whether the land use, whether the zoning changes after that. If indeed what I've just suggested is, and I'm confident it would be, I would recommend it, and I'm confident the council would agree that that's only fair. You can't, lead people down the garden path, and we wouldn't do that. Okay, I hope that helps.
All right, we're going to wrap it up now. I would really like to thank everyone who came out this afternoon, evening, to ask some really good questions. I think we've all learned a lot more from your questions, and we understand what your concerns are. And again, I'll encourage you to talk to individuals in the municipality and from some of the other organizations who are here. And if you are interested in one of the other options, I think it's fairly clear, Sarah, as to which room to go to. And there'll be people there to take your information so that we can keep the conversation going. So thanks again, and enjoy some coffee and cookies while you're here.